This project started all the way in December of last year, when my oldest brother asked me if I could make him a clock that looked like the door from Bilbo's house from Hobbit. And I agreed, but he said that it has to be done on February 20th. That's plenty of time, I thought, but I didn't want to waste time and started designing a couple days later. During the next month, we were discussing details, and pretty soon I had a final design that was ready for production. I had some other work to do during that time, so officially I started on 1st of February. Knowing that I have 20 days to finish this, I already knew I would make it in time. But like always when I make something, things don't always work out according to plan. First thing on the list was to cut everything up to size and make 3 boards, because this build is made from 3 parts. Center part will be from ash, door frame will be from oak, and the outer brick part will be made from maple, with every brick being painted with wood dye. The original entrance from Bilbo's house is made up of planks, so to mimic this, we made this board from 14 pieces, each with the same width, trying to make it as close as possible to the original. But in the real thing, there are these grooves in between planks, and at first we wanted to give each piece a beveled edge, but since the numbers go through these grooves, that wouldn't be ideal, because they will later be filled with epoxy, and that would be difficult to seal against leaks. So the plan was to make these grooves with the CNC, and the cut had to be on the actual joints of the wood, exactly 24 mm apart. Coming close to the numbers, but not through, of course. And for that, I used this big V-carve bit, and every time I have to use such a large bit, which is not very often, I use a wooden board to protect me, in case the worst happened. This is a diamond bit, and this was my first time using it. Surprisingly, it was super light, and the quality of the cut was impressively smooth. Well, of course, since it was brand new, but these diamond bits are known to last a very long time, and I was super excited to use it throughout the whole CNC part of this project, but that excitement would last only until the next board. After making these silicone dams, I started preparing the epoxy, and I have never used fluorescent pigment before, and there is nothing really to it, but I was surprised how much the label recommended to add, to get the desired glow. And when you're working with normal metallic pigment, you normally add a little bit, depending of course how rich the color is supposed to be, and it just kind of floats and mixes nicely with the resin. But this gluing pigment was so thick, and it always sunk to the bottom, which was new. While it was curing for the next 3 days, I started working on the door frame. I again used my diamond bit, and everything went smoothly until the end of this clip, when I had to press the emergency stop button because the spindle started violently shaking and vibrating for some reason. And this was really scary since the whole axis was shaking and I thought that the spindle was gonna tear out of the metal. Not sure what to do next, I cleaned and tightened everything, even though nothing was loose. But in the process, I turned off the machine and moved the X-axis while it was off, and made my 0 point to go out of place, which meant I had to do it again. It took a couple of tries, but even then it was off balance. But after a while, I managed to get the misalignment sorted out. I couldn't figure out what was the problem, but I had to continue working. So I just changed to a different bit, increased RPM and made shallower passes, but I was still pretty anxious watching this cutting out the profile. Thankfully nothing bad happened during the milling of the last board, although I was still very cautious from the previous experience. Originally, this part with bricks was supposed to be from individually glued bricks, but that would probably be way too difficult and time consuming. There were about 10 or more days left, and by this point it was about halfway there, but there was still a lot of work left to be done. During the resin-curing process, the wood somehow got really warped, to the point that I had to clamp it in order to straighten it out a little bit. After that, I applied green stain, and this alcohol-based stain was great, because it had nice rich color, and it soaks in really quickly, so I had to wipe it immediately. And after a second coat, I put it back in the clamps. It might seem kind of wasteful to use such a big wooden board for such a thin circle, but we keep almost every offcut from previous projects, and we always try to find a way to use this wood, but it will probably end up mostly for scrap wood projects. We don't cut them up immediately to smaller size, but rather keep them tucked away somewhere, and when there is a new project, rather than looking for brand new wood, we first check these offcut boards if they fit the requirements, and we have a lot of these offcuts. But you never know when you might one day need that particular piece. One of the requirements of this build was that, if possible, to not have all bricks look the same, so I took about 4 shades similar to brown and painted them all with water-based dye. I had to take my time to paint these precisely, so this process took around 3 hours. At first I thought that I would use my 3D model as exact reference and paint it just as I prepared it, but instead I decided to just wing it, which made it a little bit easier and removed any tension. After letting it dry overnight, it was time to assemble all 3 pieces. Starting off with these 2 outer parts, we placed them perpendicular to each other to hopefully avoid any future warping. Final piece seemed like it would be easiest to glue. We just had to use some small blocks as an extension to the clamps, but it had trouble to stay locked because the bottom side was not flat all the way, it was anchored on only a small part. And because of that, the clamps always wanted to lean away and couldn't snap properly. But then we thought of adding exercise bands to the top of the clamps, and it worked. And with all of that done, we left it for 24 hours to fully cure. Normally applying oil is the last step, but not this time, since there were still a couple of steps left to finish this. With only a few days left to the deadline, I quickly made a 3D model of the doorknob, sanded it and tried to paint on some highlights, although I have no experience with painting such a small objects, and this is the best I could do, but since the doorknob would be so small, any imperfections wouldn't be noticeable on the wall. Another new process for me was painting with fluorescent paint, and it was surprising how dense it was, almost exactly like the epoxy. But one nice thing about this paint is that it is sandable, because it was really thick. It took me like 3 coats to get it to look decent. I also expected it to have a blue glow, but it was basically just a regular green fluorescent color, and I would love to show you how it looked in the dark, but even after leaving it charging in the sun, our camera just couldn't see it glowing at night, and I have no idea why. At first I had no idea how will the moss be attached to the wood, but then I decided I'm gonna go with wire, and I found a bunch of them, but then I found this perfect copper wire, just that to shape it and glue it in place. Before I started adding the moss, I put in place the sawtooth hanger, added the clock mechanism and the doorknob. I was a little bit unsure how difficult it's going to be working with the moss, but I quickly found out there is nothing really to it, just trying to make it look good. And I think it looks pretty good. It's supposed to look like bushes growing on the sides of the entrance, like in the original, but for some reason, to me it kinda looks like old-fashioned sideburns beard style. With 2 days left to the deadline, the very last step was to add the clock hands, check if everything is working, and I could declare this piece as finished.